The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Siege, we went in on the John Tortorella firing on our last episode. Since then, Flyers have won some games. Matvei Michkov looking real good. Very interesting times, obviously, in the city of brotherly love. What do you think is next for them after this Torts firing, and who could be next to coach them if Bradshaw, for whatever reason, doesn't stick it out as the interim? What do you think is next for this team?
Well, I think that big picture, the coach search will be, a piece of business that I expect, Danny Briere and the front office to get it down to work on pretty quickly after the season's done. I mean, there's not a ton to be done on that in this moment. Obviously, Bradshaw, they're comfortable having him coach for these last few games as the interim. He'll be considered, I'm sure, but I wouldn't expect that he'll be kept on as a coach. He's a, really respected guy around the league, spent a long time, primarily teaching the defensive sides of the sport and had success doing so, but he's been a long time assistant for a reason, right? That's probably how he's best wired. As for who they end up hiring, I think they're going to be looking for someone with some experience. It doesn't mean it won't be a first-time NHL coach. Like, I don't think we can rule anything fully out at this stage because it is so preliminary. But, this is a team that's going to be looking to taking big steps now from where they've been these last number of years. I mean, the Flyers are not a rebuild it and let things sit for 10 years kind of organization, right? I mean, you look in their DNA, they have always taken massive swings on trades. They were always a huge free agency player in terms of signing the big guys, giving out monster contracts. And so I do think in this, maybe as soon as this summer, but certainly not far beyond it, they're going to be looking to making those kind of ads. And then, of course, bringing along the Michkovs and a lot of these guys that they've drafted, younger players in the organization, to take a step forward. So, to do that, I think they feel they need an experienced voice behind the bench. That's what John Tortorella was, of course. But I think by the end, he just wasn't fully on board with, what was happening. I think it took a toll on him, right? I mean, it's hard to read into anything other than those post-game comments from that game in Toronto, his last game he coached, as anything other than I think he just was a little fed up with how it was going. And losing is difficult. I think it gets even tougher on coaches the deeper in their career they are, like Tortorella. And so, that situation comes to a head. We all wait and see what happens with Rick Tocchet. I mean, I think that there's naturally a lot of smoke there, but again, it's not because there's like a contract negotiated and it's all done. I think it's just because Rick Tocchet's the kind of guy that fits the needs, I think, that the Flyers are looking for. His own future in Vancouver is a little unclear at this time. He's got past connections to that organization. He is a former Flyer. It's one of those ones where it lines up and makes sense, but a whole bunch of things have to happen between now and at any point before he could ever be stepping behind that bench, including seeing what happens in Vancouver for the rest of the season, where, they're not looking too good to make the playoffs themselves. That, a couple tough losses here at the end of that road trip, including in Winnipeg on Sunday. But, I think he'll be a favorite for that job if he becomes available, but that still remains a pretty big if.
I want to throw out another name. We talked about it in the chat, but I think it would be a good discussion to have on air here. David Carl, who's had the NCAA success and winning back-to-back championships with Team USA at the World Juniors. He's a younger coach. I know you mentioned maybe the Flyers would want someone with experience, but I think he looks like a really attractive coaching prospect to enter the NHL right now. I wonder if Philly would have any interest in him.
Well, it's not just Philadelphia with him. I mean, I think the question is, does he jump to the NHL now? Because what makes Carl unique is he's made it quite clear that he's happy with his lifestyle in Denver. Coaches the University of Denver, obviously has had that success with USA Hockey as well at the World Junior team. But, he's not looking just to take any job to get in the NHL to say he's in the NHL. I think he really wants to be sure it's the right fit for him, that the organization views it as a longer term play. I think the one thing that NCAA coaches tend to value is that they have a lot more stability in their jobs, typically. It's not to say that they're never fired, but, if you look across the NCAA, there are coaches that have literally coached 20 plus years for one program, which meant you lived in the same city for 20 plus years and you got to raise a family there. I mean, it's just not the reality for NHL head coaches. I mean, outside of John Cooper, who's had just an unbelievable run in Tampa, going all the way back to the end of the 2012-13 season, most guys are getting 2 years nowadays. A lot of coaches aren't even moving their families from city to city when they take a new job. They're just because, they want stability for their kids. That puts a lot of pressures on obviously a family, on the individuals. I mean, I can't imagine having to do that myself. And so it brings us back to David Carl, because is he going to be ready to jump to one of these jobs, or is he worried that, he takes one of these jobs and then in 2 years' time, he's looking for a new place to live and he's uprooted, his family. So, it's a long way of saying I do think certainly he's going to attract NHL interest. I think he has in the past, but it's going to have to be the right situation for him. As much as the team looking to hire him. And so I don't know how that's going to go. I do think we're moving into a window here, Julian, though, where there's going to be a fair bit of a shuffle behind the benches. I mean, if you count Philadelphia, you've also got Chicago and Boston with interim head coaches. So, decisions there with Anders Sorensen in Chicago and Joe Sacco in Boston. So possibility for 3 changes right there. You've had a few other teams. If the Rangers don't make it, obviously there's been speculation what happens with Peter Laviolette. I mean, you go down the list, I think it's reasonable to think we could have 6 or 7 head coaching changes in the next few weeks. Just looking around the league, understanding where there's some pressure points, a few coaches on, with 1 year maybe left on their deals. And so, that's, I guess if there's one good in this, I mean, Philadelphia, as we talked about in the last show, they didn't want to make this change now. But if there's one positive of ripping the Band-Aid off and doing it, is I think you can start to lay the groundwork for those searches maybe and be in a position to pounce pretty quickly in the offseason. Because if there ends up being 4, 5, 6, 7 teams looking for a coach, they're obviously going to be looking at a lot of the same candidates.
Can you imagine Peter Laviolette going back to Philly? He just feels like he's going in and around that Metro division, obviously with the Rangers right now. But he's very familiar, obviously, to a lot of Flyers fans for his work getting them to the final in 2010.
I mean, I can imagine it. We've seen coaches go home again, right? Lindy Ruff's back behind the Buffalo bench. You had a couple tours of duty with Claude Julien in Montreal. I mean, it's not completely unheard of. So I'm certainly not predicting that. And please don't clip this and make it seem like that's anything that's being reported. But I mean, look, the NHL, like, coaches get jobs over and over and over again, especially ones that have had a track record of winning and turning teams around. So, I mean, I made this point when we were just quickly reacting in real time to the news of John Tortorella being fired. I mean, until he says he's 100% done, you never know, even with him. I know he's at an age where certainly you think he's getting down to the end, but we've seen, Rick Bowness coach beyond the age John Tortorella is in recent years, Bruce Boudreau as well. There's still, until the fire is totally out, the pilot light's out, you just never know, because it might be a really good team that needs someone to push them over the top, and maybe Torts wants to take another swing at it. So, the flip side of all this coaching turnover I'm referencing league wide is, a lot of these coaches end up working for 4, 5, 6, 7 teams. Especially the ones that have won and won a Stanley Cup like Tortorella has.
The coaching carousel. You mentioned Torts. I was talking about him with a colleague the other day, and you bring up an interesting point. Like, maybe there is a team that goes through some shuffling, and they know that Torts is a guy who, if you give him the right mix of players, he'll try to squeeze out as much as he can to try to get you to the playoffs. If that team shows up, we'll see. But my colleague and I, we were talking about it, and we're wondering, probably if you're like on the lower end, if you're a rebuilding team, like, you're probably off that list. You probably have like no interest in John Tortorella being around your team, considering the comments that he said off of that last night in Philadelphia, where he essentially said he didn't feel he'd be coaching the type of team he was coaching. I wonder if you share that same view, where if you're Torts, or if you're any of those teams that are on the lower end. I'm not saying they're the perfect example, but Chicago as an example. Like, you're probably crossing Torts off of your list with how he's approaching a situation like what happened in Philly, where, yes, they're not trying to be a long-term rebuilding team, but they essentially were playing like one for most of the season.
Yeah, think of it like your dating app. I think both sides are swiping. Is it left would be the no-go on that side. I just think for him, it wouldn't make much sense and probably those teams. And look, there's sort of two ways that teams go when they're in a rebuild or when they have a young group. You either go with the young coach, generally speaking, who can grow with the team. Like the idea is that you kind of make mistakes together and learn together, or you go with the established coach who's there to sort of set a culture, but they're probably not going to be there long. Really, that's what John Tortorella was in Philadelphia. He was brought in to, basically do what he does. He coaches through confrontation, right? I mean, he's an in-your-face guy. That's what he does. He was there to do those things and have them be as competitive as possible while essentially retooling the roster, which is what management's been taking care of. And he did it until he couldn't do it anymore. But, so you look at I think those rebuilding teams are either going to be looking for someone. It just doesn't feel like it would be a fit, essentially, is right. A long way. It's a long way of saying, yes, the conversation you had with your colleague, if I was the third person in that conversation, I would have agreed with you both, because I just don't see it. And quite honestly, I don't know at this point. I haven't seen any quotes from John Tortorella. I haven't talked to him myself. I don't know if he's, maybe he just doesn't need or want this anymore either. I mean, he's done this for a long, long time. And so, it's a demanding job. And I think you saw the strains of that at the end of his time in Philly. I mean, he just, he I don't think was fully on board with the plan management had. Obviously, he was coaching Cam York in a way that led to them having an altercation, benched him for 50 minutes of that game in Toronto. So you're down to 5D and you end up losing 7-2 that night. I mean, it was a mistake Cam had made on the very first goal against in that game. It got to a boiling point and a breaking point. And so, I guess when you're still within days, you probably think I'll never do it again. But it's more like check in a month or two and see, hey, are you missing it? Or, because you only get a window of time in your life where you can do these sort of things. And so that'll be the true test, I guess, if he's back.
You're touching on it in your answer just now. Cam York. There was an altercation between John Tortorella and Cam York. Probably better to call it an argument. Sure. Because I think altercation might suggest something physical. And I think it was more, them a heated disagreement, which again, I think John Tortorella, if you look at the path this year with York in particular, like that was a player that he was hard on. And that, we've seen this pattern play out. And look I've talked to a number of players over the years that have been coached by Tortorella. I've yet to find one that badmouths a guy. Honestly, I think most people, especially when they step out of the heat of what's going on in any situation, really appreciate the way that he likes to have things up front and tells you what he thinks, doesn't play head games in the sense that, he tells you why you're being sat down or why you're being scratched. If you have issues, his door is open to you. So I think actually a lot of players do appreciate the way this goes, but, York was sat for a game in early March. He watches that one on the bench, and, he's since come out in the media in Philadelphia and taken ownership for his side of that argument too. And said, didn't provide any details of exactly what went on, but did acknowledge that he was at fault too. So, I mean, that is actually John Tortorella in a nutshell, frankly. Like, he really does coach through confrontation. He sometimes calls players out in the media. He's not afraid to sit someone on a bench for 50 minutes of a game. Like, that's his style. And so anyone who's hired him ever by now knows that. I mean, you obviously want that style of coach if you're even, interviewing him and considering bringing him in for the job. So, him and Cam York had a tough go, and it didn't end well. But even then, I read a story from Kevin Kurz where Cam York said that he felt like Torts did a lot of good things for him too during his time there. So I just think that's kind of what you sign up for with Tortorella. And, it honestly, the more I've heard about this situation, like everything, it just seems like he was just done. Like he reached his point where that was it, his own breaking point where I think he'd had enough of the job. And, the Flyers, Danny Briere stepped in and did what he had to do and fired him. So one more player to bring up with the Philadelphia Flyers, Michkov. in light of what you've been saying about Torts, and maybe he just reached his breaking point with this situation, when you see that Matvei Michkov has 4 goals in his first 2 games post Torts, how much of that is that just the player being good, and how much of that is him not being coached by John Tortorella anymore?
Well, the thing I noticed more in the 4 goals is the bump in ice time. It seems like he's getting more minutes now and more opportunity, which, when you're an offensive player like Michkov is, it leads to those things. It leads to those good outcomes. I don't know. I don't know if there's a narrative out there that he was being held back by Tortorella. I think that they obviously had some back and forth, but again, he seemed like another player that didn't mind it. I mean, most players don't arrive in the NHL ready to knowing everything, right? That they have to. There is definitely a learning curve, and a coach's job is to try to help, especially talented young players like Michkov, but really anybody through that process. And look, he's taken right off under Brad Shaw. I mean, I would imagine it's just a different voice. It's not going to be this is good cop now. If we're gonna call John Tortorella bad cop, this will be good cop coaching for the rest of the year, because why not? I mean, you want a player that player is so important to the Flyers long term, right? I mean, he's a star quality player that if he reaches his potential, will be a superstar in the NHL. You want him going into the summer feeling good. And, there's no way to feel good about the season the Flyers have had at this point, especially how tough it's been the last little while here. But, one way to have him feeling good is to play him lots of minutes, give him positive reinforcement, hope he continues filling the net, and gets a few more Calder Trophy votes probably too in the process. I mean, that's a difficult decision. I know we've kind of danced around lately, but that's coming up. You're having Lane Hudson piling up points for the Canadians. Obviously, Dustin Wolf doing his thing in Calgary. Macklin Celebrini's had a great year in San Jose. I mean, there's a lot to be looked at there. And so why not maybe rally around trying to get Michkov's numbers a little higher as an organization? And I think that, as if you're in Bradshaw's shoes, that just makes sense to do everything you can to have his season finish on a high note.
This is not me trying to get you to talk in depth about the rookie race. I know you haven't done your homework. But if you're Matvei Michkov,
I just haven't seen the whole show yet. I don't know who's going to make the playoffs. And
right, I understand that, but I look at Matvei and him start to take off, and that rookie race. I wonder where he fits in all of that. There was a time where you could say he was the favorite. There was a time when you could say he was second or third. I just wonder if Lane Hudson's done enough. I think he had 3 assists against the Florida Panthers on Sunday. The Flames still have an outside chance at making the playoffs, but Dustin Wolf has made his case. Macklin Celebrini, of course. Can you imagine, man? After all that, Matvei Michkov, a super promising rookie, he could still become a superstar. Just finishing 4th in that race for Rookie of the Year,
Here's the thing: somebody has to finish 4th, right?
Yeah.
And whichever market that player is from, I think we're pretty. I don't think we're excluding anyone by basically narrowing the race to those 4 players at this point. It's not to say there aren't other rookies that have had good years, but I think it's pretty clear that the choice would come from there. Somebody is not going to be nominated, right? They announced 3 nominees after the season. So the day that happens, whether it's Philadelphia or Montreal or Calgary or San Jose, you're going to have a fan base and perhaps reporters in those markets rightly saying this is horse beep, because you can make the beauty about awards is you can make a case. It's not always a right and wrong type of thing. I think that they all have individual cases that can be made, and you can pull numbers. And that's why the ballots, just so for the record, do not come out till April 11th. They have to be submitted by April 19th. I will not be submitting my ballot before the games are played April 17th. That's the last games of the regular season. So somewhere either on the 18th or the 19th, which will be the first day of the Stanley Cup playoffs, is when my ballot will go in, because I always just think it's better to see everything. It's not to say that there's likely going to be anything that happens on April 17th that changes the vote. Probably, but who knows? To me, if they give you that time, why not use that time to fully look at the season, to fully have the conversations I have, to consider everything I can. And so, we're only sitting here at the end of March. I still got 18, 19 days, my friend, to mull on this, which That's plenty of time in my world.
Hopefully we can trade notes on our respective ballots when it comes time. I'd love to. I mean, we talk enough in the group chat enough as it is. I'm pretty sure that could help us out with who we want to win any of the respective awards out there. I will take as much help as I can get for this, so I can make sure I get this right.
Well, again, there isn't a right. I just think you have to be fair. You have to really look at it, and then it's what is right to you, right? Like it's not about a bias thing. It's more about you're comparing, in this case, a goalie, 2 forwards, and a defenseman too. Like there's all kinds of different ways you can do that. You can look at how many of the minutes maybe that Hudson's playing because defensemen play more. We can look at the number of starts that Wolf has. Does Calgary get it? Somehow make a miracle charge here? Like that could still happen. I'm not predicting it. Anyway, it's there isn't a right and wrong. It's just I think you have to be consistent. You have to be honest, and you have to keep your mind open to all the possible outcomes.
I know there's not a right and wrong, and I know in my head I'm thinking like what feels right to me. It's just like, yeah, I guess that's it, right? Like I want to make sure I do what's right for me. And I mean, I'm sure you don't think about it that much, but like we've talked about it before. But like the fact that like these ballots go out in public and we get judged and people have their own opinions and stuff like that, like I can imagine there are definitely people who keep that into consideration when they think about who they vote for too and all that. Like I feel like that adds a pressure to all of that.
Yeah. I mean, look, I was around in the PHWA when they had the debate about whether the bubble initially when I first started voting, the ballots were all private. But there was a push for more transparency from within the organization. It was brought up by writers at the time who were saying we should do this, and ultimately it went through. And so there's ramifications to that. I think, I'm in a position because I cover the whole league. I don't feel this personally, but I know maybe if you're the writer in one city, there might be a certain pressure to vote a certain way. And if you don't, that there could be, like you have to consider those things, I guess. But I mean, at the end of the day, you do your best and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have that right. Anyway, let's move from Philadelphia to Alexander Ovechkin. On Sunday, scoring again, he is 5 goals away from breaking the all-time record for goals set by Wayne Gretzky. I think 9 games left for the Washington Capitals. What's the date you picked for Ovechkin to break that record? I think it was one of the...
It was this week.
It was this week, yes.
It was April 2nd or April 4th. I can't remember which one, but either way, it's... CJ Damas didn't appear here because I think it's going to take a little longer. Honestly, I had clarity on...
Are you sure? Are you sure about that? Like 5 away?
I will say...
All it takes is one hat trick. Hat trick in one of these games this week, and all of a sudden, you look like a genius.
I had new clarity on Sunday watching the Capitals play the Sabres. It's going to go down to April 17th. It's going to be the last game of the season in Pittsburgh. It's going to be hella dramatic, no matter what happens, if that's the case. I mean, if he goes into that with a chance to tie, or if maybe he's already tied Wayne's record and he's got a chance to break it. His longest time rivals, a team that at times this year has had trouble getting a save. I know Tristan Jarry's gotten things back on the rails here of late.
Got a shutout on Sunday.
But every team, no team wants to be the team that gives up the record breaker. Like, Marc-Andre Fleury did an interview where he mentioned that. He's like, I didn't want to see that highlight for 50 years. But the Penguins especially, like, I just think there'll actually be juice in that one game if they have a chance to deny him until the start of next season from doing it. So I don't know. All of a sudden I was watching the game and I've been thinking about lately, like he's still scoring at a great rate. I think it's his 6th or 7th best season in the NHL by goals per game, like at age 39, pretty incredible, given all the great seasons he's had scoring wise to even put himself in the spot. But he's only getting like 1 a game when he's scoring lately. And I'm like, this is how it's going to go. It's just going to be, every other game he's going to get 1 and it's going right down to the wire, buddy.
For those wondering, April 1st, Washington in Boston, the next game on the road against Carolina, and Chicago on April 4th. If you're thinking of games just this week, they have the Islanders, they have the Canes again, back-to-back games against Columbus, another game against the Islanders, and then that game on the 17th against Pittsburgh that CJ is referencing. There's opportunities for Ovechkin to do it for sure. But yes, if it goes down to the wire to April 17th, Sidney Crosby, I mean, first off, congratulations to him. 20 point per game seasons, an NHL record. Sidney Crosby will fight heaven and earth to ensure he is not the one. At least him and his goalie anyway.
Well, he's not killing penalties though.
Like, that goal.
Yeah, there's still going to be there's still going to be opportunities. There's still going to be opportunities in that game. You know, I think I might have mentioned this. I just talked to Barry Trotz. I did a story this week speaking to some of Ovechkin's former coaches, and he said something like he's going to have 100 shots between now and the end of the season. Like he's like and then this was, to be fair to Barry, I don't remember exactly how many games and how many goals he needed, but it was a week or so ago. And he's like, there's no way he's missing this. He's like, when he gets locked in on something, he's going to do it. So I still think it's more than likely he gets it done this season, but we're now getting to the zone. Like he's 5 away after the goal Sunday. One more goal, and it's the traveling roadshow. So after Ovechkin's next goal, unless the plans change last minute, that's when you get Gretzky on the road and you get Gary Bettman and the people from the NHL, you know, more people from the league's head office, and it becomes even more of a circus than it's already been, put it that way. I should mention, too, on a previous episode, I'd said there was a time limit on how long the break would be, you know, when he does break this record. I was politely, how would I put it? I was politely corrected on that they're going to give it the time it needs. So who knows? We'll see what they have in mind. I know there's obviously going to be a heavily produced moment. It's going to be something that they've been thinking about. You know, they had meetings about this all the way back in December, and as it's gotten closer and closer and closer now, you know, the league wants to make sure that they properly, you know, serenade the moment, because who knows, like, when the next record of this significance could fall. I mean, it will probably be on the other side of my career, quite honestly. I don't see anyone. I know that Draisaitl and Matthews and some of these guys you could game it out and say they're on pace, but it's, they've done the easy part, which isn't easy, which is the first half of your career being, you know, crazy prolific. What's harder is as you get into your 30s, staying healthy and being able to do it as long as Ovechkin did and Gretzky did. I mean, think about this record, Julian. It's going to go from Gordie Howe to Wayne Gretzky to ultimately Alex Ovechkin. I mean, like, that's 60 years of NHL history right there. Like, just it's going to be a very special thing. Anyway, I mean, it's funny that there's a highlight on the TV behind me right here showing his goal against the Capitals right now. He's celebrating them all too, right? He's celebrating them all like he knows what it means. Anyway, it's going down to the last day of the season. That's my new prediction.
I'm glad you mentioned the TV. For those watching on YouTube, thank you, first off. Two, if you see that CJ's eyes kind of like look up like this, he's got a giant television screen in front of him where he's recording. That's like the proximity of where he's at right now. Like, if you're a parent and you walk in, you see CJ as close, you're like, move back. Like you're slapping him on the wrist for being so close.
And I got hockey on, so obviously I'm curious about what's going on up there.
Absolutely. I mean, what else would you have this on? Corgi races?
Exactly. No chance on that.
No. Yeah. So we'll see what it gets there. Could you imagine if it goes down the wire April 17th? Maybe he's already tied it at that point, and then he doesn't score in that game, or he doesn't break the record in that game. You got to wait all the way till October. Like, that traveling show follows him mid-October, right? Oh, yeah.
In fact, I know when Wayne Gretzky broke the all-time points record, which was held by Howe too, it was in October when he broke it. It was pretty early in the season. His goals record he broke in March. But yeah, it'll still be cool. It's a long summer, especially for some of us like myself who've written 4 or 5 stories on this. Like, it's a long summer of like, how do you find new angles leading into the season if he's only 1 away? But first world problems. It's a great problem to have. Oh, they're showing Ovi's schedule here now, Julian.
Okay.
Boston, Carolina, Chicago, the Islanders, and Carolina. Next
all
5
the dates
games.
I mentioned. All I mentioned a couple moments ago, but yes, like there will be ample opportunities for Alexander Ovechkin to rise up the ranks and eventually break that record from
4 games in the next 6 days, though. I know he's playing lots of minutes, and
that's a lot.
He doesn't break down, but it's going to be a tough schedule. It's going to be tough.
Absolutely. One other player I want to ask you about, Nikita Kucherov and the Tampa Bay Lightning. I'm just curious, like, I don't know about you, but I feel like it's been kind of quiet around them this year. I don't know if it's just because of the years removed from winning a Stanley Cup. We know how good of a team they usually are, but like, I don't know if it's just because I have Sen's brain and I've just been following that one team, but I feel like just with where they're at right now, that hype that we would normally see around the Tampa Bay Lightning isn't there. As we're recording, they're second in the Atlantic Division. That's a three-way race for that top, by the way. Like, that is going to go down to the wire, I think, too. But what do you think of how Tampa's been playing lately, and Nikita Kucherov, who all of a sudden wants a second consecutive Art Ross trophy, tied on points right now with Nathan MacKinnon?
Well, I'd say look at the team's goal differential, and that tells you a pretty good story. I actually don't have it in front of me, but I know that they are among the league leaders in that department, and teams historically that have done well in the regular season tend to have playoff success. You know, shame on us for having Tampa not be a story this year. I mean, all they did last year was, in very sort of difficult or controversial fashion, however you want to frame it, walk away from the franchise legend Steven Stamkos, let him go to free agency, redirected the money or a portion of the money they would have had to pay him to getting Jake Gensel, made a trade to get Ryan McDonough back from Nashville. And then through the season, obviously made the big deal with the Kraken to get Yanni Gourde back, Oliver Bjorkstrand as well. Julian Brisebois has had to make some hard decisions there. And Brandon Hagel, who I know we talked about a lot at the Four Nations time because he was a standout performer for Canada, he's having a tremendous season. He keeps elevating. It's just yet one more guy because, they still have Point and Kucherov, Hedman, Vasilevsky, and they just keep finding more guys. So, look, I wouldn't rule them out at all. I don't know. I guess the good question would be, like, how close are they to the best Tampa teams we've seen in the last 10 years? And I don't have an impassioned answer on that. They're probably not as good as the absolute peak of that time, just because those key guys I mentioned are getting older. But the fact you still have Kucherov, could be his third Art Ross trophy, if he's able to pass McKinnon and hold him off here, which, I mean, that could talk about things that might go down to April 17th. I would say that the scoring race would be one of them. Leon Draisaitl's looking pretty comfortable in the goals race, so I think he'll already have his Rocket Richard trophy secured by then. But the Art Ross could go down to those last couple of days easily. And yeah, the Lightning look like a beast. I mean, as much as the Atlantic is seeing some shifting tides here, Boston, for example, no longer being a power, the Ottawa jumping up and having a better season they've had. I mean, it's still that division runs through Florida, and and Toronto's leading it as we record right now. So, I mean, who knows? Maybe this is the Leafs year. I stare too closely at that picture to know what's going to happen next. I'll just be watching along and seeing what happens.
So my next question to you was going to be, who wins the Atlantic Division between those three teams? Are you just going to take a hard pass at that?
I'll say Toronto. I think that they are as incentivized. Like, if you're Tampa and Florida, I think the Lightning are comfortable opening on the road anywhere. Like, their best players are so experienced. They've had so much playoff success. I just think that getting in is what matters for the Floridas and Tampas of the world. As I say that, of course, like, I know that there's basically every night that a couple of the teams play, it could be a leapfrog situation. You can go from first to third, what have you. But I just think the Leafs have a lot on the table to try to get, to win the division. There's no easy path, but I think it's at least you're not playing one of those two teams, Florida or Tampa, in round one. So I'll stick with the Leafs, but I'm not saying it with a ton of confidence, just because we're basically saying who's going to be hot for 7 to 8 games, and any one of those teams could go 6-1 down the stretch or 7-1. It wouldn't even bat my eye. I guess two of them can't do it though, because Florida's got 2 games against the Leafs remaining, and I think Tampa's still got 1 too.
By the way, Tampa has a goal differential as we're recording, plus 69. That's third best in the league, behind Winnipeg and Washington, the 2 best teams in the NHL. Right.
And so, all stats, there's not a perfect stat, but all those things tell you that from a process standpoint, the point is to score goals and to keep them out of your net. those teams are doing that very well this year. And so, yeah, it could be Tampa's year. Maybe we'll have a Tampa St. Louis final, like two teams that finished hot.
Ooh.
I'm not predicting that. I got to stick with Edmonton.
I know.
I got to stick with Edmonton.
I know. But like St. Louis, that team is not losing. They're winners of 9 consecutive games in a row right now, and they are not the team to chase in the wild card in the West, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and they've got the good news is I think there might be some question about how their schedule's factored in. They haven't played as many playoff teams. If you look at the next few days here, that they got all the heavyweight teams to go through, and they just beat Colorado in their last game too, their most recent game. But we're gonna get a good test to see them against some of the league's best here this week. But yeah, I mean, I think it's legit. They had, if you go back to the Four Nations break, they've had a breakthrough since that point.
Yeah, it's just absolutely insane to see. And conversely for the Wild, who are also in that wild card chase too, I believe as we're recording, we've said as we're recording a lot today. Minnesota and St. Louis level on points. 8 games left for them. The Devils are going to be on their schedule. The Rangers are there. The Islanders, the Stars, Sharks, Calgary, Vancouver, and Anaheim to end their season. There's still an opportunity for Minnesota to rack up some wins before the end of the year too.
Yeah, they're having trouble scoring. Now they had a bit of a goal fest the other day, but they being without Kirill Kaprizov as long as they have Joel Eriksson Ek, both those guys are working their way back and are practicing now, which I think is encouraging. But it's been a tough road for the Wild, and I think they're still okay to get in, but man, they've been leaking oil here if you look at the last 4 to 6 weeks.
Speaking of oil, do we have an update on Connor McDavid, who's missed the last 4 games with a lower body injury? Head coach Chris Knoblauch spoke today.
The update, as I've heard it, is really the question is, does he come back on the California road trip the team has this week, or does he essentially miss what would be amount to another week of time and basically play the last 5 games that Edmonton has beyond that fact? And so, I don't think that decision's been made. They'll just take it day by day. Get the sense everyone's on the same page and understanding, as much as the Oilers want to, we talk about home ice advantage and all that stuff, as much as they want to finish where they can in the standings as high, I think the bigger priority is making sure that Connor McDavid's in the best position to perform no matter where game 1, round 1 starts or is played. And so, it sounds like he's getting a little closer, and there's certainly nothing that's come up here that makes me concerned about his availability into the playoff time. But we're down to just figuring out which game he returns on. And I think it's still possible we see him at the end of the California trip this week. But if not, I would think you'll see him in the 5 games beyond that. Barring a setback, of course.
Of course. And with that, it's time for questions. Thank you to everyone who sent in questions for Ask CJ. We do this every Monday. Whether you have X or Blue Sky or Discord. You ready to answer some questions?
Let's do it.
From Jer, if Columbus makes the playoffs, will Dean Evason challenge Spencer Carberry in Washington for the Jack Adams?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that whether or not he wins or not, it's hard to predict, but I would be stunned if the Blue Jackets make the playoffs and Dean Evason isn't among the 3 finalists for the award. It would be hard to find anyone out there that maybe isn't employed by that organization who thought that was possible. I remember they did a video coming around the holiday break, and it was like a New Year's resolution video, and a lot of the players were saying, like, make the playoffs. And I was thinking, like, what? Like not, sorry, like, I know it sounds harsh. I don't mean it as harsh as it sounds, but I just was surprised how much they were talking about it, right? Because it just never, and I'll admit, that early in the season, I'm not really watching the standings every day as much because, it's so far off. It just didn't seem like a thing that was possible to me, even as recently as that Christmas break. But certainly as we've gotten into the new year, we got to the trade deadline, they elect to hold on to someone like Ivan Provorov, for example. They re-signed Matthew Olivier, another player they could have potentially looked at moving. I mean, that something special is happening. And so as I did in the last episode with you, I've backed the Blue Jackets publicly. I think they're the team that's going to get in to the wild card spot in the East. And when they do, Dean Evason's definitely going to be on a bunch of ballots for the Jack Adams Award.
I know I'd love to see it too. From Richard, if you're on the mic doing commentary for Alexander Ovechkin's 895th goal, do you have an idea of what your goal call would be?
I couldn't do that job. I'd be so stressed about it. We talked about announcers recently. Someone, by the way, texted me and said we left out Dick Irvin as for fans of a certain generation or age, that was a voice that was near and dear to their hearts. But
100%.
I couldn't have that call. I mean, I think simpler the better. It depends what the goal looks like a little bit too, right? I mean, is it from his office, like a one-timer type of goal from the circle? Is it a maybe like the goal we saw on Sunday against the Sabres isn't what you call typical Ovechkin goal. He's tipping it in front. Probably in real time, the announcers are not 100% sure if he got it. Like you think it's him, but you know what I mean? Like you got to be careful with that call too. You don't want to unleash the call on one that he didn't tip, right? Because there's a goal by Pierre-Luc Dubois that some people additionally thought, because it was an Ovechkin shot in that game, it was the second goal of the game. So I don't envy the job those guys have to do and girls, but I do think that they will definitely have ideas of the sort of things they want to say. I mean, you have to, right?
Yeah.
You have your call. You were the aspiring play-by-play guy. You should be giving us this fake call.
No way. I would not want to. I'd have to really think about it. But I know I'm looking forward to listening to Joe Beninati make his call. I wish I would have been able to ask him what ideas he might have, or you know how play-by-play guys will write down certain lines on their play sheets of what they'll want to say for a particular moment. I wonder if he would have done the same thing. And depending on who's calling the game in the States, whether it's on ESPN or TNT, whose voice are we going to hear? Is it going to be a Kenny Albert call? Is it going to be John Butchergross or Bob Wischusen or Steve Levy? I don't know who would be on the call for ESPN, I guess, but there are so many different options. That's an interesting thing for those guys too. If you're a play-by-play guy and Ovechkin is in your building, you're thinking oh my God, I have an opportunity to, people are going to hear my voice. Just like how goalies don't want to see themselves on that call. If you're a play-by-play guy and you get that wrong, you risk not being heard. Not even just oh no, we're going to take the call and everyone's going to hear you mess up. People are going to find a way to put the best one on wax so everyone hears that for the next 50 years. You want to get that one right. Yeah.
I'm stressed out and I have no control over any of this. But just thinking about it, it's wild.
It is. So from Penn's MUFC, CJ, how do you view the Pittsburgh Penguins retool so far on the night when Ville Koivunen, the first product since Dubas has changed direction, is making his NHL debut against Ottawa? That was on Sunday. What do you see Kyle Dubas doing this summer and next season for the Pens?
I don't see his vision changing. I think it's going to be doing absolutely everything he can to get younger NHL ready players. The Penguins haven't been a team. They obviously acquired a whole bunch of draft picks with the players they traded out in the lead up to this year's deadline, but they haven't been a team that's always just wanted draft picks. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see them flip some of those draft picks for sort of younger players. I don't think that they're going to flood the roster with established 28-year-olds. I think they're looking for sort of 21 to 25-year-olds, depending, and looking for value there. And I like that strategy. It's one where they're not trying to fall to the bottom of the league. I know they've had some tough losses lately, a couple, game in Buffalo, game in Tampa, where they got spanked pretty good. But in general, they're trying to expedite this as quickly as they can while they still have some legacy players on the roster. I don't know if he's going to be able to do it, but I think they're going about it the right way if you have any chance ever to make that work. So my view of it is they're just going to keep on keeping on and try to find more players that can push things forward, because obviously it's now going to be a third straight year out of the playoffs. And there's a lot of pressure when you're building a team that has, a Mount Rushmore player in its lineup and a couple more, and Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang, who've meant a lot to that organization, who've won a lot of games and won 3 Stanley Cups together. So, my gut tells me they're not going to be able to get competitive while those players are still relevant players for the Penguins, but Kyle Dubas's intent to prove people like me wrong.
Also, like, whether it's Kyle Dubas or anyone else, if I were a GM and if I were in that spot, I don't know if I want to be the guy. Look, here's the thing. You're a GM. You got to do what's right for your team every day. But the idea of being the guy who, say if it ever got to that point, you want to move on from those legends and try to get assets for them. If you're the guy who's like, all right, guys, we're trading away Sidney Crosby, like, you have to deal with so much blowback for that. Just the pressure of that is immense.
Yeah, you're not forcing him out of town. It's whatever he wants. However he wants this to go, that's what's going to happen. You know, you've got one more year of Malkin under contract, so it's probably his farewell tour next year. But yeah, we're getting to the end of the line. I mean, it's crazy. 20 seasons. I mean, it's wild. 20 seasons for Crosby and Ovechkin, the two guys, and obviously now Ovechkin's, you know, closing in on this crazy mark. Crosby setting new records. It feels like every night. Time goes quick, pal.
Sidney Crosby, 20 NHL seasons against the Ottawa Senators on Sunday, had Rutger McGroarty on his line, who turned 21 on Sunday.
There you go.
Just want to give you a sense of how long Sidney Crosby's been in the league. From Fog, does Connor Hellebuck have a chance at the Hart Trophy?
100%. I think this. He'll be on ballots. I don't know if I've seen enough kind of momentum in his favor out there. Like, I don't go around asking other writers what they're going to do with their votes, and I'm certainly not trying to influence anyone. But I think how good the team season has been, how clearly tied to that success he's been, all the shutouts. I mean, the numbers are mind blowing. So I think player judged to be most valuable to his team. You're not wasting a vote if you're putting Connor Hellebuck's name down among the top 5 when you're casting your ballots right now.
Austin was asking if Leon Draisaitl is leading the Hart Trophy race. I didn't expect that many Hart Trophy questions.
You know, he might be, because it's hard when you share a team with Connor McDavid. It's always going to be hard to win player most valuable to his team. But, you know, Connor has been injured this year, and he hasn't been at the level he's been at in the past. It shows in the points, I think, in some of his plays. You know, he's even mentioned himself. So the way Draisaitl's sort of lapping the field with the goals, and the fact that he's kind of elevated at a time when his main partner in crime hasn't been at his absolute super-powered best, I think there's a chance. I mean, to me, it's another wide open. You know, you're going to be able to make a case for Kucherov again, for McKinnon as well. Does someone like Zach Werenski get love if Columbus gets in the playoffs? Especially, I think that there's a case there. You've got Hellebuck. I know a lot of people have been talking about Quinn Hughes and how special his year's been. I mean, he'll probably lose some marks, whether it's fair or not, because it doesn't look like Vancouver's going to be a playoff team. But I think that there's a lot to look at, and there isn't a clear 100% favorite to me. I don't know where the betting lines are on stuff like this, but to me, there isn't like one guy dominating the conversation. Like, it's going to be him. I think it's still very much a jump ball with a couple weeks left in the season.
Last one for you from Huggy to Petey. Hey, CJ, do you think we see any offer sheets this offseason? And if so, who?
I don't have the who for you. I think we do, just because there's going to be so much money flooding into the system, and there's only so many impact players. I mean, right now you look at the UFA market; it's not a deep market, and we've seen even players like Jacob Chikrin, you know, sign extensions here of late. It just leads me to believe that teams are going to be looking for ways to spend that money that are effective, that are efficient, and at the same time, we've seen St. Louis have so much success with Philip Broberg and Dylan Hollowell, you know, two players that they got via offer sheets last year. Now, the one thing that I think GMs are divided on is you can make the point I did. Hey, there's all this money in the system. You could use that against saying there are offer sheets too, because you're going to say every team has money that they can match those offer sheets. So I think you can play both sides of the coin, but it just seems like the atmosphere around them are changing, and I think you're going to see more teams try them. And why not? They're perfectly legal under the rules of the league, and every team is looking for talent. And that's maybe the best way to try to get some is to sign. Wouldn't you rather overpay a player who's 22 than one that's 32? I think that I mean, that's simplifying very much the decisions, but that's kind of what you're dealing with. You know, you might be overpaying someone, but to me, you want to, if that's what it takes to get them in your organization, it's probably worth the gamble trying to do it.
Let us know your thoughts on CJ's last question in the comments somewhere. Anyway, great work as always, Siege. Not just on the podcast, but also, of course, at The Athletic. Great story on Ovechkin that you referenced in our episode. We'll be back on Thursday with stick taps and more great stuff. For Siege, I'm Julian. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.